Yeah, so it's Nordic Cooperation.
Talking back to the Nordic Pavilion here in
No,
Glasgow.
I was.
The next topic here today will be sustainability for whom? And I seem to need another mic. Let's hope that this works better. The topic for this next session will be sustainability for whom, how rights of local communities and climate solutions can go hand in hand. This is a joint event between our pavilion here in Glasgow and our hub in Helsinki. And I actually want to start by presenting our panel. We have a panelist in Helsinki. His name is Tuomas Kuhmunen. He's from the Sami Parliament and from Sweden. And we can't see him now, but I hope he's there because very soon Tuomas is going to have a speech. We have Jojo. There he is. Hello. I hope you can hear us. Yes.
Yeah, I hear you.
We have Jojo Mehta, co-founder and executive director of Stop Ecocide International. We have Lorentz Tovat, parliamentarian for the Green Party in Sweden. We had Lasse Björn, Sami Council in Norway. And we have Olav Elvestuen from the parliament in Norway. You're all very welcome. But first of all, let's go over to Helsinki, where we have Tuomas Kuhmunen. And Tuomas, the floor is yours.
Hello from Helsinki. I am Kuhmosa Bihto Antarasa Erkki Irene Donna. I am Tuomas Kuhmonen from the Sami Parliament of Sweden, and I work as a GIS coordinator. And the topic for today's discussion is, of course, sustainability for whom. And I will do a presentation regarding, let's see if I get it working. Should be picture soon arriving. Oh, back. There we have it. Sami land use. Well, when I went through the presentation prior to this event, I saw that I'm actually not going to talk that much about Sami land use. But I will get into that. This is, of course, Sapmi, the traditional land of the Sami. And I will talk, for the most part, of the Swedish side of Sapmi. And when I'm talking about indigenous communities and land use, I'm going to talk about reindeer herding. So in Sweden, on the Swedish side of the border, we have 51 districts, where 33 of them are mountain districts. Those have pastures that stretches from above the tree line up in the mountains during summertime and during winter time down in the boreal forests. And then we have 10 forest districts, of course, that conduct their reindeer herding below the tree line all year long. And then 8 concession districts in the Torne Valley. Short about reindeer and reindeer herding in the landscape. The reindeer flows through the landscape between 8 different seasons. Us, the Sami people, we acknowledge 8 different seasons. They are all tied together with weather, with grazing, with the reindeer's biology, etc. And the reindeer husbandry manages a complex world based on a cohesive landscape perspective. And the reindeer, of course, it has a natural behavior. It's a semi-domesticated animal. It's domesticated to the point that reindeer herders can handle them. They can gather them. They can gather them to corrals. They can move with them. And the reindeer, of course, it in quota collects resources where the resources are best. During summertime, of course, the magnificent green growth that comes during spring and throughout summer. And then during winter time, it feeds mainly on lichen, and that's ground lichen and tree lichen. And different places in different times, as I said earlier, between the 8 different seasons. And a traditional landscape perspective from a Sami point of view is this. What controls the reindeer? It is, of course, the reindeer herder. It is, of course, the pasture. It is, of course, predators, it's topography, and it is the weather. But now I'm going to take you through a short period of time, 100 years, in the county of Västerbotten. And we will see what has happened within the landscape. This is from 1915, and when people talked to reindeer herders back then, they talked about, yeah, agriculture is part of a problem for us. Villages and towns with loose dogs can create problems for us. Predators is a major problem. They talked a little bit about roads, railroads, and hydropower, but it's not at all the type of traffic that we see nowadays. And when we move through, now we're going to jump up to the 1950s. And I want everyone here on the panel and everyone listening to ask themselves what has happened throughout the years and where is the zero state? When do we consider that we have moved beyond thresholds for what the landscape should be able to handle? So we jump to 1950, and agriculture, villages and towns and predators are on their way down. At the same time, the number of roads, railroads, hydropower, mines, and logging is going straight up. And you can see that I've put the mechanized forest industry within parentheses, because it's now that we see the mechanization and the rationalization of the forest industry. And I will take an example to show you. But then, 2015, now this is the landscape. Agriculture, villages, towns, and loose dogs are on the same level, but at the same time, number of predators, forest industry, roads, railroads, hydropower, mine, wind power, tourism, and hunting and fishing are going straight up. So is this a landscape that the biodiversity and the seasonal transition between the eight seasons, is this the landscape that is considered a whole landscape? Let's move forward to a part of the forest. Just a sec. I think I said this is Västerbotten County. Why isn't this working? Nah. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. Two pictures. I've lost two pictures. But perhaps I should move on. No, still back in 2015. Why aren't there pictures? Yeah, I'll just move on. Let's take the picture. Anyway, what I was supposed to show was a part of the upper Midlands of Västerbotten County, which has shown how the forest has changed and how much has been clear cut in 50 years. Let's see if I can get my presentation on screen again with the loss of lichen. This is my worst nightmare. My God. Could the booth? Great, thank you. I'm getting confirmation that they are working frantically. There we go. Yes, I'll run through it quickly. 66% of the land is covered in forests, probably lichen abundant forests. Between 1958 and 2004, these parts are being clear cut. And what grows afterwards are denser forests in more that have to be taken care of more, because they are growing up denser. This has created a problem for reindeer herder, because as the report on the decline of ground lichen forests in the Swedish boreal landscape from 2016 shows that lichen abundant forests within the reindeer herding area has gone down by 71%. I think it's somewhere around 65% outside the reindeer grazing area as well. And this, of course, creates problem for reindeer during winter times. And now we have this. This is a graph showing temperature differences in Abisko. That's in the most northern part of Sweden. And the baseline is set surrounding the 80s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, which is sort of the mean of what a normal temperature in Abisko is supposed to be, and that's -1. And then something happens in 1989 and 1990. And now we've seen that in Abisko, for example, we are already witnessing a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. And this is the fact in many places within the reindeer herding area and in the Arctic as a whole, of course. And then, of course, with a problem comes a solution. And now the green transition has started. And with it comes minerals, extraction of more minerals, more wind power for a sustainable future. The problem being is that one of the many reports clearly states that reindeer prefer areas where wind power is not visible. And surrounding it, of course, the turbine takes up so and so much of square meters, but then surrounding it, it has an area of effect to up to 5 kilometers, which makes it so that the reindeer won't stay as much grazing within those areas. These 3 pictures are before building, during building, and in use. So the question is, of course, sustainability for who? And how do we make the green transition within an already shattered landscape? And with those words, I want to thank you. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. And we started a little bit here because I was missing many of my guests. so I will go back to just presenting for the audience exactly what we are going to talk about now so that it's clear for everyone. We're going to talk about the rights of indigenous people and local communities that need to be safeguarded as demand for lands and minerals increase. Some traditional livelihoods are facing challenges due to climate change and development of climate-friendly solutions. And we are going today to try to find answers to a few questions. How can the rights of indigenous people and local communities go hand in hand with climate solutions? We saw some problems in Thomas's presentation just there. How can the rights of indigenous peoples, no, that was exactly it. And how can we ensure the rights of indigenous people and local communities when we design climate policies? That's what we're going to talk about. And before we go to the panel, I turn to you, Jojo, because you have a short presentation for us.
Yeah, I have a rather sort of specific element to add to this. Which is that I believe that one of the things that we're looking at with it, and indeed in this whole conference, is are many ways of trying to produce the energy and the products and the things we need more sustainably in a more of a green way. And what a lot of that boils down to is how do we play the game we're already playing, but play it better? Now, we've been trying to do that for many years. And what we're clearly seeing is that we are kind of starting to crawl in the right direction, but we need to be sprinting in that direction. And by going in that direction, we are also in particular instances like that outlined by Thomas, threatening what ultimately we're also trying to preserve. So how do we kind of look at that particular conundrum? And the particular ingredient that I would like to throw into that mix is a conversation that is growing louder and louder across the world at the moment, and that is the conversation around ecocide. And around creating an international crime of ecocide. In other words, criminalizing the worst harms to our natural living world. Because at the moment, we need, what we're actually needing to do is not just play the game better, but change the rules. So that whatever we develop, whatever industry progress we make in the right direction, it is done within a parameter that acts as that guardrail, as that safety rail. And I actually brought with me, and this was quite fun, trying to get into the conference with this definition. But just this year, a legal definition of ecocide was drafted by an extraordinary panel of international criminal and environmental lawyers, and it's one sentence long. It's very simple. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with the knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, that is actually very simple, but it's based strongly on legal precedent, and it brings another element into criminal law, and particularly at the highest level. Effectively, most of our legal system is anthropocentric. It's not taking account of the reindeer, for example. What this law would do is bring an element of ecocentrism, not completely, but into that structure of the worst crimes. When we put ecocide alongside genocide, we're actually balancing out that equation a little bit. And I think what we're also doing is we're saying that, rather than trying to always sort of focus on so many different projects of how can we do this better, if you just put an extra rule in place, then whatever the project, at the drawing board stage, that question is going to be asked, because the individuals making those decisions will have to be thinking, is my decision right now, is the act I'm taking by signing off this project, for example, is it going to be putting me in danger personally of being criminally liable for the destruction of nature? And what that will do is actually unleash creativity in the right direction, so that the new ways of doing things actually take that into account. We all know you wouldn't go to a government and say, can I kill 500 people for my new business? So we need that same level of taboo for the worst harms to nature, so that our thinking starts to move in a new direction. And just to finish this, just a very brief sort of snapshot of where we are with this. There are 16 governments and parliaments, states in other words, that are members of the International Criminal Court, where this conversation is live at the parliamentary and or at the government level. And just yesterday, the Belgian Foreign Affairs Committee voted through a resolution demanding that the Belgian government legislate for ecocide nationally and support an international crime. And so there's strong momentum on this, and it's growing. And the corporate community is also starting to call for it, so that they know where those edges are and they can manage their risks. So I hope that gives a little bit of a sense of the potential of this law that is coming.
Okay, thank you very much, Jojo. And I think I want to start this panel discussion by turning to our politicians here. We have two here on the stand, and I think I'll start with you, Ola. What do you think of ecocide, if we start there?
Well, I think it's more on a international level, if this is a international court system, to put it that way. I think because in these problems that is presented here, and the problems in decisions that are made, whether it's in Norway and Sweden, it is not that we do not have all the that not every issue has been looked into. Also the environmental issues. I mean, everything is being viewed at, everything is being considered, but then the sum of the decisions are then going in the wrong direction anyhow. So I don't really think that, I don't know if the ecocide law would change that in a way, because no one here is breaking the law, or no one here is working where you have not considered environmental issues in many ways. So, but on the international level, it's a interesting thought where there is no sanctions or whatever towards the worst destruction of the environment.
Okay, you say everything has been looked at. I want to hear Lawrence here comment as well. Is that how it is in the Nordics, that actually we don't need a law on ecocide? Because we don't need a law on ecocide because we actually look at all parts of everything that will be in some way affected when we make decisions already. It's just the sum that is maybe not correct.
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here in this panel with this company, obviously. Well, I would say that Ola is right on one thing, that is that there's no one breaking any laws right now necessarily, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look on on new ways of regulating, for example, the Sápmi area. I think that is obviously needed, and I think that if we would, I mean, ecocide is one way of doing it, and I think that is a really interesting way of tackling the problem on a global scale, but as you were talking about, it will have effects locally as well. And I mean, for example, the wind energy issue. I mean, if we would have a better regulation, there would be more interesting for the wind companies to build the windmills offshore, for example. That would be one concrete consequence of actually more stricter regulations, which would be much better in many ways. So I would say that we need regulations to really take into consideration the indigenous people's rights and lives.
Lasse, Björn, how do you comment on what you've heard so far?
I find it quite funny that they're saying that no law. Oh.
Now, I'm not sure that we can hear you.
Testing.
Yeah, now it's
now
good.
you can hear me. Okay. I find it quite funny they're saying that there are no laws being broken. For a few weeks ago, we had a court case in Norway saying that the indigenous rights of the Sami were being broken at Fosen. And this is an issue of ecosystems, of our livelihoods. And I'm also saying that we have looked into everything. Have we looked into the ecosystems of the Sami, of the reindeer herders? So I'm not seeing that right now. And I'm seeing that if we had stronger regulation on ecosystems, that means that politicians like Ola Elvestuen, who have made quite a lot of projects in his time in the ministry, are forced to actually act and take care of nature when they are making new projects. And when we're talking about wind industry, when we talk about all the extractive industries, it's always a question of scale. Can we have it smaller and better? But right now we have politicians that have been pushing for the largest projects, North Europe's largest wind industry in Fosen, which was the court case. And I think stronger laws would have made all of them to be smaller projects.
Yeah.
Ola, you wanted to
yes,
comment?
I'll comment on that because I agree that you need a stronger laws, and of course the Fosen's the case is very important, and it's the Supreme Court that said that it's been built illegally, but it's not ecocide. That's the ILO Convention, and that is an important part. That the ILO conventions that Norway has ratified, and it also will give the Sami people much more, what can we say, a stronger position, and you have to have this Supreme Court decision will definitely lead to changes in the way these projects or decisions about similar projects in Norway.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn now to Thomas in Helsinki. How do you comment now? The ILO convention, would that be enough, or do we need other kinds? Would you ask for other kinds of laws and conventions?
It wasn't the ILO convention on the Norwegian side.
I can't hear you now.
The rights of testing 1, 2.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe it wasn't the ILO convention that was tested on the Norwegian side. It was ethnic and I don't know, IP.
It is.
Don't know the short name for it. But from my point of view, at least, as a GIS coordinator working with maps, many of the problems are, of course, that all of these encroachments seldom see themselves within the landscape. For example, one mining operation doesn't see themselves as being a part of everything else that's going on within the landscape, like forest industry or roads, infrastructure, tourism. They see themselves oftenly like an isolated island. And that, of course, creates a lot of problem when it comes to actually, as many of the international recommendations states, that to see the broader picture, we have to, of course, look at the whole landscape as well when we're making decisions on that it's based within the landscape. Then if there should be any other international law or national law, I can't really decide upon that. I'm just a state official.
No, you don't need to decide on it, but I just wanted to hear your view on it. But already here, I think we can hear from the discussion and from your comments that there is kind of a conflict between the green sustainability agenda and the rights of the indigenous people. So what should we do in order to get the situation, make the situation better? Who wants to start? Jojo.
I'd love to come to the idea about this. This is to do with, I think, a reframing. And I think that is one of the strongest offerings, if you like, that the ecocide conversation can make. Because I think just the fact that we're talking about which convention does this and what exact regulation is it that we're applying here, we're looking into the sort of technical bureaucracy, the detail of specific conventions, and this is all incredibly important. But at the moment, all of that environmental law sits on a void. Now, at least if you're campaigning for human rights or social justice, you know that mass murder and torture are profound, are international crimes. Or part of crimes against humanity, for example. If you're trying to preserve an environment and to look after the natural landscape in which you're existing, you don't have that baseline foundation that says that damaging that ecosystem is wrong. And I think it's also it's interesting to think that, in this definition, one of the part of the definition of severe, in terms of severe harm, includes cultural damage, and that's something that has been clearly missing in international criminal law. That effectively severe harm that affects, an ecosystem, but effectively that is having an effect, therefore, on the culture of the inhabitants. When that is serious, that should also be considered ecocide. And I think so bringing that in is really important. And the other aspect of that reframing is that at the moment, those who protest, demonstrate, really sort of, want to bring to the attention of the world the damage that is happening to their local communities when a company moves in, say, to do mining or logging, they're the ones that are currently framed as the criminals. When actually, in reality, the damage that is potentially being done is what should be in the area of criminality. Now, as soon as you create an international crime of ecocide, even a national one, what you're doing is you're reframing that. And those defenders, instead of being framed as criminals interrupting legal permitted activity, become the moral upholders of the law, and the companies are the ones that have to pay attention to the decisions that they make because they risk potentially creating a certain level of damage. And I think this mindset goes very, very, very deep. This sort of thing of how we separate ourselves from nature. And the Sami culture, along with many other indigenous cultures around the world, are only 5% of the world's population, but they're guarding, practically they're guarding 80% of the biodiversity. Spiritually, I would say they're probably guarding all of it. And that's not a coincidence. We have much to learn from that. And so a reframing of this kind becomes incredibly important.
Well, how do you comment on the reframing thought, Lawrence? Yeah? Yes, absolutely. Let's hear now. Let's see that you are heard, because I couldn't hear you in my phones. But I hope that our technicians are following. Yeah, just...
Yeah, Kela, just...
Yes.
In general, I would say that, first of all, the consultation process needs to be strengthened and much better in general, and the voice of indigenous people, Sami people, needs to be listened to, obviously. And I would say that there are a lot of places where we shouldn't mine at all, and where we shouldn't build windmills, for example. And so then the question is, where do we get the energy from? Where do we get the minerals from? Well, find it somewhere else. That's the answer. And we know that there are places around the world that really can produce sustainable minerals, also within Sweden, and sustainable energy production. But also, I think that if a bigger picture here as well. If we would go to the core of the problem here, is that we use resources too easy. We just buy new stuff and throw it away instead of trying to make a circular economy. And we know that, for example, I mean, the mining places in Sweden today, they have a lot of what do you say, slug product, the waste.
Waste,
There's a
yes.
lot of waste there that you could actually make a lot out of. So try to get a more circular economy to use everything much more instead of just digging for more.
I could see Ola wanted to comment also. On the reframing, I would hope.
Yeah, what we really need is
Yeah.
stronger environmental laws, of course. And we need maybe also an international ecocide that is there, but it must be an international court, I think. What we need is stronger laws. And what this decision at Fosen mean also in Norway is that reindeer herding needs stronger rights and stronger protection. And I'm certain that this will also be the case because of this decision. And we have also strengthened or made it harder to put up windmills in general in Norway, but it will be in particular in the northern parts of Norway and the areas where we have reindeer herding. And I'm certain it will also apply for mining and also other areas. But apart from that, because one is the big destruction of nature, that may be ecocide. But what we looked at, if you looked at that time frame, most of those decisions are small decisions. It's a road here, it's a building there, and it's the piece by piece destruction of nature, and the piece by piece making it smaller and smaller, and that's what we have to change. That's what we have to bring back. You need more nature in the future. You need to make larger areas where reindeers can move, and of course also have the necessary biodiversity. And that is to have stronger environmental laws and stronger and more environmentally aware politicians and decision makers that really make every one of those decisions.
Lasse, you're nodding here. You think that what Ola just says is the answer?
I think it's part of the answer to have stronger environmental laws and stronger protection of nature in general, and also the point that there are some larger projects that are being developed, but also there are lots of small. We are losing land piece by piece. That's something that reindeer herders all over Norway and Sweden and Finland, all over the world really, indigenous peoples are seeing they're losing areas in small manner. But I think when we go back to the main question, when you're asking about climate solution in conflict with indigenous solution, I think I don't really agree on that question. And it's because why are we protecting, why are we trying to stop climate change? What are we trying to protect? And that's, I see, it's a nature. It's the biodiversity, it's the way, it's the food production, and all that. And when we then are looking at energy production, only at energy production, it became so small. That's not why we're trying to protect from climate change. So, and indigenous rights is in line with this. We are trying to protect nature. We are trying to protect I'm losing my speak. To protect our biodiversity. So I feel like we are trying to do the same thing, and that's, yeah.
Yes, everybody nodding here. Yeah, that's good. You were talking about educated politicians, people who understand about climate change, for example, and that is, of course, a very important thing. I have a question about indigenous people in the political processes. To what extent do we have, for example, the Sami people in the political processes that concern the Sami people? Who wants to answer that? You want to start, Lawrence?
Yeah, no, that's the thing I was talking about before with consultation processes.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean,
consultation is one thing.
That's a really good point here with, I mean, the knowledge that actually taking care of nature is. I mean, there's so few people that really have that knowledge, and it's so precious, that knowledge. So it's not just an issue of indigenous people's right to be part of political processes, but it's also an issue of gaining that knowledge in a sense, so to speak. I would say that it's really important not to just talk about consultation, but also representation within
Exactly,
the decision areas. For example, I mean, I don't know what about other delegations, but in Sweden we nowadays have some representation within the Swedish delegation here at COP, and we're trying to have representation in more areas and in more UN conferences as well. So that's an example, but I mean, we are just in the beginning. Much more needs to be done.
Did you want to comment?
Nice representation. I think consultation is nice, representation is nice, but we also need a free and prior and informed consent when we're talking about extractive industries on our lands. And I feel like the Sami people and all other indigenous peoples need the right to say no to projects that are involved on our lands.
Yeah.
And you agree, Ola?
Yeah, the consultation process is important. And I think we should not talk that out. It is really, as every issue that is in the department that is also concerned to Sami, that is a consultation. And apart from that, of course, you have the Sami parliament and the elections, and the democratic part of that is important. And you also have the discussions also in the counties. I mean, you have some also majority councils that we have that also have their decisions. So it's always a balancing of this, but it is that debate that must be the groundwork for what also decisions that we take. But what I say on this issue, I mean, now we are at the Paris Convention and we are at the COP26. But just as important is, of course, the Convention on Biodiversity that comes this spring. And just as on this COP, every nation, they come with their goals for 2030 or 50. I mean, how to follow up the Convention on Biodiversity will be just as important also, and that every nation, every country follows it up. And that will be very important when we look at these issues, as with everyone else.
And how is that going? If we're looking at what's happening here at the COP26 and then at what's going to happen in Kunming, how much do you see these two processes being interlinked? Because that is really very important. Can any of you comment on that? Yeah.
Well, just short, not enough, I would say.
Just gonna say that's a very short answer.
But just there has been a lot of critique to some of the agreements that were put forward last weeks. But it's interesting to see that now more and more countries are talking about phasing out deforestation, for example. So that is some connection, at least.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a bit of a false sort of separation there, because I mean, from my perspective, I see, I mean, climate change is effectively a symptom of which the mass destruction of nature is the cause.
Right.
So, unless we start going to the root causes, we're never going to be able to actually get where we need to go. And that means, destruction could be, of forests or of marine environments, but also air pollution, and ultimately that obviously includes climate as well. So I think we just have a bit of a tendency in our Western mindset to kind of compartmentalize things, and everything's interconnected. We're deeply dependent on these systems. And just to come back very briefly on what you were saying about the circular economy, I mean, I think that, if large-scale mining projects, for example, really large-scale ones, as you say, that this would be, addressing at the highest level, we could be looking at mining all of the minerals that are already out there in use and not being, and create the structures to reuse those, all those rare minerals that we need for technology. We don't necessarily have to, fully depend on new mining. And of course, that's always going to have an end point to it anyway. Yeah. We need to be far more creative about how we're sort of, reusing and repurposing what we already have extracted from our Mother Earth.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it's just really short that a bit of problem with these conventions are that they are separate, that we come biodiversity and climate convention are two different things. And I think it's changing. We're talking more about biodiversity in the climate convention, and we're talking more about climate change in the biodiversity convention. And that's something that needs to continue. And I think some of the issues we see today are from the issues have seen as two separate things.
Yeah. Nature-based solutions are much stronger in this convention than were just 2-3 years ago. So something is happening, but it's not happening fast enough. And you really have three things we have to do. You have to stop the use of all fossil fuels. You have to not only stop the destruction of nature, we need much more nature in the future. And basically, the real challenge is to make a global market economy within the boundaries of nature. And that's really what we have to do. And I think for the Convention on Biodiversity, one thing is to set goals. I think all the Scandinavian countries are part of the high ambition coalition also working on towards to have a strong convention and also to have a kind of Paris agreement on nature so that we there also have this progress and this process that it strengthens over time.
And that we can follow.
Yeah. It's really, so it's a huge...
We have a problem with your microphone now. I think you should take this one.
Yeah.
But Thomas, I'm looking at you there. We haven't forgotten you, even though you haven't said anything now for a long time. What do you? I'd like to ask you. We have been talking now mostly about Sami issues, and I understand that that's closest to your heart. But thinking on a global scale, on indigenous people, would you say that the problems that you face are very alike the problems that other indigenous people face all over the world? I mean, how much can you cooperate with others when you have these challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. There are similarities for sure on our view of nature and our view of the landscape, for example. And then, of course, reindeer herders have more in common with other pastoral indigenous people. But you know, the whole basis, and that is really interesting when you meet other people from indigenous communities, is that sort of besides having a sort of a unfortunate dark past when it comes to colonization and everything that occurred during, well, the 16th century up to now, there are so many similarities and people understand each other in a different type of way on how, for example, how it affects your soul when you see land being destroyed. Like these type of issues are, as I see it, is within the whole indigenous community all around the world. So yeah, there are different indigenous groups that are facing the same problems, absolutely.
And if we continue a little bit about this, how, if we compare how indigenous people are treated within the political framework in the Nordics and in the rest of the world, how are we handling these things in the Nordics? Who could answer that, the comparison part? Ola?
In comparison, it's much better now, but the Nordic countries, we have nothing to be proud of when we look at our history. I mean, the repression has been just as strong here, trying to wipe out the cultures, and it was done for decades. And it's really, like in Norway, maybe one of the hardest environmental fights about the Alta building of the hydropower there that made this change. So afterwards, it has been, of course, an improvement, no doubt about that. And when you look at around the world, for Norway, working a lot on preserving rainforest. I mean, you cannot be successful in preserving rainforest without looking into human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples. It is important in itself because they live in this forest and to preserve the culture. But you can also not preserve the forest without having those human rights and having their rights looked after.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think for one part, it's clear that we have it better in the Nordic states. We are not getting killed in the streets. It's clear that we are privileged in a way. But we are also losing areas in the same way as indigenous peoples in the rest of the world are losing. And when we're talking about rainforest, for example, then we are losing forest in Sweden, in Norway, but also in other Arctic communities in Canada. When you're saying which countries where is the largest deforestation in the world happening, people are saying the rainforest in Amazonas, but really it's in Canada. But because it's been chopped down for 40 years ago already, then it's acceptable. But really it's hurting biodiversity just as much. And I think those issues need to be raised as well when you're talking about biodiversity, and that's happening to our indigenous peoples in Canada.
We are at the COP now, so what we should be thinking about is actually where we started off. I mean, how can these two things be combined? The rights of the indigenous people and the work that has to be done when it comes to what's happening to our climate and to biodiversity. So what is the next step that we should take?
Well, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Just as a sort of let's put the safety rail in place. You know, that's not by any means the only thing that needs to be done. And the other thing I think is we need to operate, I mean, globally, we need to be operating in a less siloed way. We need to be approaching those who our decisions affect, and taking as many decisions as possible at the most local possible level and kind of working up from there. So, you know, with the sort of safety framework of, you know, what is not acceptable, just as we say it's not acceptable to kill people, you know, and then actually not just consulting, but actually having the decision-making power, you know, rest in a much more local-based sort of federal way. But that's a long-term project, whereas ecocide crime could be done very quickly and help to create that framework.
Well, it's gonna be difficult decisions if you look at every country, and it's different from every area. I mean, we have to stop using fossil fuels. And that is, so we will need renewable energy, and it will be complicated decisions, and there will be conflicts also. When it comes to wind farms, when it comes to hydropower, it definitely will be there. But we have to we need better planning. It must be possible to get that renewable energy without negatively affect reindeer herding, without negatively affect the important areas for biodiversity. We have, like in Norway, we have had quite a lot of building of wind farms the last 15 years, I would say. Some of them should definitely not have been built because the planning process were not good enough. We have changed that now, but that will also make it harder to build new windmills. So the problem will be, how do you get enough renewable energy without the negative effects of it being built? And that is a dilemma that we will stand in, and a lot of countries will be a part of.
Yeah, that is the dilemma, and it would be very nice to have the answer of how to get the answer to that dilemma, really. You wanted to...
Yeah. So just also, as we spoke about, I mean, coexisting with the right to decision about their own land and consulting and representation. But I would also again want to push this more broader political conclusion, that is that we cannot continue living our lives like we do today, when it comes to every single person need 1 or 2 cars, every person need another iPhone every single year. Is it like that? No. We don't need a new iPhone every single year. We don't need 2 cars each for each person. That's the things that are driving the need for new mining projects. And we can't continue like that. So we need to rethink the way we use resources, and that is a political conclusion. That's a political insight that needs to be accepted by more politicians around the world. And when we get that insight, I think that more of these problems will solve themselves.
Yes, you're talking about like a systemic change on a very, very on a level that comprises everything actually, and everyone, not
Yeah.
only indigenous people. Really,
I mean, we
not.
can work a lot on like coexisting within the Sápmi, for example, when it comes to representation and right to decision over the land and so on. But one of the consequences, if we don't go to the core of the problem, is that this kind of mining will move to another place in the world, and we don't want that either. So we need to rethink the whole economy, actually, if we want to solve these problems once and for all.
Lasse, Björn, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think first I was saying I agree on all of what you said right now. I think indigenous people's right is now in place and protecting nature. Today we are actually out and stopping projects, saving nature, and that's a good thing. But we need to go to the core of the problem. And I think if we're just starting to calculate how much energy is possible to get from wind industry, from all the different sources, and we see that it's not possible to have the kind of increase that we need and we see. And that means we need to realize that and find other solutions. And the earlier politicians see that their view for the future is not possible, the earlier we can start to find new solutions. Just one thing one need to correct. I'm representing the Sami Council, which is a Sami civil society organization, representing Sami from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. So I'm from Norway, but I'm representing the Sami civil society.
Okay, very good. Sorry for that. I actually wanted to ask if somebody in the audience here in Glasgow has a question, because you have the opportunity to ask now if you want. We have a little bit of time for that. And we have one question there. Could I lend you? Just come in here so the camera can reach you also.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I would like you to elaborate a bit on this last point about like economic, like systemic change, and also the fact that you were saying that today indigenous people's rights protects nature, but that is also driving a lot of conflict. We see that in Sweden with increasing racism against Sápmi people. So I would like you to also, like, given a reflection, what do you think would happen if we don't get to the root of the problem? If it's only about like strengthening these rights and then like all the time Sápmi people having to protest and having to also be seen as sort of the like being in conflict with other people's interests.
Yes, who wants to answer that? It's not a very easy question.
Yeah.
Okay, you start.
I can start, and I think that's a position we don't want to be in. We don't want to be seen as the people that are always saying no to everything. We are protecting our rights and our livelihoods because we must. It's not something we want to do, and we see increased. At least on the Swedish side, we see increased racism because of protecting nature, those issues. On the Norwegian side, maybe not with the larger group of wind industry movements, we have at least had some new allies in the environmental and civil society as a whole. But I think when we need to get everyone on board and we need to go to the root of the issues, we can't take this fight alone.
I want to let Thomas Kohonen also answer this question.
The hardest question of them all, I suppose. Well, I can only agree with what Lasse said, that it's not our intention to always be looked upon as sort of the naysayers. And this is, of course, a problem that is facing a lot of indigenous communities everywhere. Of course, we don't, as Lasse said earlier, we don't get shot. But there is happening things within sort of the Nordic societies. There are new generations that are thinking in different types of ways than earlier generations. So I think that there is a ball in motion that is getting bigger, and I think it will be, in the long term, it will be getting better. But how to do it in the short term and how to solve it, it's a hard question that I can't really answer.
And then I turn to the politicians here in our panel. How do you look at your responsibility when it comes to this?
No, I would just like to say that the point is really solid, and I take that as a proof of the point that I made, that we need to look at the system changes here. I mean, I think that the Sápmi people have the right to be naysayer, but it's not sustainable to be that in all eternity, which will be the case if we don't go to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that we have an overconsumption, and we buy new stuff all the time. We need all these minerals all the time to new stuff. When we can instead go to a system where we circular our materials much more. And that is the political conclusion, which needs to lead to political action to phase out new materials and instead recycle and make them more circular.
And we really don't have time. I mean, if there's one issue, we're really in the same boat. It's on climate and nature crisis that we are in. So we have to cut our emissions by 50% in 10 years. And we have to start really to rebuild our natural world, not only stopping the destruction, but also to restore nature within the next 10 years. So this is a struggle that has to happen now. And it's... And I'm sure that myself and everyone here, of course, are part of a lot of those struggles already. I would gladly stop Øyfjellet if I could. That's the worst one after Fosen that we should. And there's a lot of these issues that is laying there just in front of us, so that we must make sure that all these decisions are going in the same direction, that you have that necessary improvement in just 10 years.
Okay, and with that I say thank you very much to our panel. We have 3 persons who have listened very carefully to this discussion and who will give us their 3 takeaways. So I say thank you to you here in Glasgow, Giorgio Mehta, Lorentz Tovat, Lasse Björn and Ola Elvestuen, and I say thank you very much to Thomas Kuhmonen in Helsinki. And then I invite 3 other persons up to the stage. 2 here in Glasgow and 1 in Helsinki. Thank you. In Helsinki, we have Elise Sørensen, who is member of the Central Board of Natur and Natur og Ungdom in Norway. Here in Glasgow, we have Simon Holmström, who is a parliamentarian from Åland, and Tine Sille Svensson, who is a Nordic youth representative. Welcome.
Thank you.
And now, 3 takeaways. I think we let Elise in Helsinki start. What are your 3 takeaways from this discussion? Please.
Oh,
thank you. I think it's important that we recognize a lot more the indigenous rights, and we are not doing enough. I've met Ola Elvestuen before when he was the climate minister in Norway, and we do so many huge encroachments on nature that we pretend we don't see them, and it's very important that we stop. Encroachments on nature are dangerous, and it's complete ignoring of the indigenous rights.
Okay, thank you very much. And then to you, Tine.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for a very nice discussion. I think my 3 takeaways goes with first the convention on the ecocide that as I heard it, there was agreement on that would be sensible to have on an international level at least. And then there are some disagreements on how local, of course, this should be, and that would of course favor more of the indigenous youth. Or indigenous peoples, sorry. And then I think it was very nice that we came to the root of the problem. That's also our consumption patterns and our lifestyles. And as it was said, that we cannot just continue mining and continue building windmills because we have to change our own behaviors instead, because we will just then have continuous land-based conflicts, and maybe we can change to electrical cars, but if we all want 2 electrical cars, then we want more windmills and so on. So definitely also switching sometimes away from this very technology optimistic oriented solutions to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And my last was that this would, I think that this is of course more long term, but I think it would be very favorable to these conflicts and these discussions if we have more education on indigenous peoples and their livelihoods, and it would be easier to have these debates if we knew more about the deeper had a deeper understanding of the cultures. And as Lasse said, that the climate crisis and the indigenous people's right should not be a conflict, because they are not conflicting in their interests. They want the same thing, to protect our ecosystems. And I think a long-term solution to this is definitely to get more clever, all of us that are non-indigenous, to have more knowledge on the indigenous livelihoods.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And Simon?
So one of the points I think was very well made clear by the panel was the conflict between the green transition, like the climate transition, and the environmental destruction. As we are moving along with our climate transition, with new windmills, with the rising energy demand, and how we use the land. And I think it was pointed at. I think the root cause, if we are going to do a transition, both when it comes to rewilding and putting more nature out there and promote nature-based solutions, at the same time solving the climate issue, is to go to the root cause, which is that we are having a norm and idea that we are mastering nature and that we are the pinnacle of the planet. And that idea and that norm has to change, and we can change that by, and that is really my second point, we can change that by normative legislation. And that legislation is both national, as Ola was saying, but also international, as Jojo was saying. And we have to work in conjunction, because if we're not, then we're outsourcing soya production to the Amazon, or we're outsourcing mining to another place. Then we're not going to solve the crisis. And my third point would be that we should also reinforce a strategic planning between different goals, not just on a regional level, but also on a more holistic level when it comes to the sea management or the land management or larger scale. And when we're talking about that, I think indigenous people shouldn't just have a consultative role, they should also have a veto role. They should have a power to say no. This is not what we as for instance, the Sami people can agree on, because this is inflicting on our rights and our traditions. I think the legislation also has to come in there from on an international scale, but also a national scale. I think by doing this, we can enforce a normative change from the political side, so that people understand the ramifications of our everyday life today and the need of doing a green transition on all fields.
Thank you very much. And I still once more want to ask you, Elisabeth, because you didn't mention 3 takeaways. So do you have more something that you want to add, or was that your most important message to us?
It was the most important, but it's we reached a point where it's not. We need a just green transition, and now we reached a point where it's more of a green colonialism, and that's very dangerous. I agree very much that we have our consumerism ways of living. There's an overconsumption, and we need to change that. And it was a very good point from. Can't remember his name, sorry, next to Lasse, about how we need to change our ways, and that's what leads how much we need to use. We need to use our resources in a good way, and we're not doing that right now.
Okay, Thank you very much for that comment and the other comments as well. Elise Sørensen, thank you also to Tine Sille Svensson and to Simon Holmström and to the audience here in Glasgow and in Helsinki. Thanks a lot.